Hey everyone, Chief Meteorologist Ross Whitley here, doing a tropical discussion for you, talking about the potential for something tropical down the road. Now, still too far out to talk details, and a realistic forecasting timeline is about 7 to 8 days. So anytime you see anything that's posted, regardless of where you're getting the information from, if it's posted 8 to 10 days down the road, meaning hour 180 to 240 or even beyond, then there's just so many variables that are likely to change in the model output that you're not looking at a realistic solution. Are you looking at something that is plausible? Probably not. Are you looking at something that is giving you an idea of what we could potentially see, meaning the pattern that develops, the potential areas to watch for development, that kind of thing? Sure, that's what long-range modeling is good for, is giving you an idea of pattern and what areas are favorable to see certain areas develop. That's about it. Details on those kind of situations, strength of a system, location of a system, impacts from a system, all of those things are just a massive shot in the dark once you get into 8 to 10 day range. And the reason for it is exactly what we're looking at here. So this is the water vapor imagery from our GO-16 satellite. And this is about the range at which our modeling takes and samples data at a high-res amount. So beyond that, sure, we have satellite views that give us other information, but this is our high-res information. So you can see that there's a lot of the planet that's not covered here. So that's a lot of information that is missing where the model has to fill in the gaps. That usually boils down to surface observations, flights, water data information, buoys, that kind of stuff. But even still, we're talking about big, massive gaps in our data information that is driving our forecasting model, which is why our high resolution models, or that stuff that happens 48 hours to 72 hours, is much better forecasted than 10 days down the road, because we just haven't sampled it. And in most cases, if you're talking 10 days down the road, you're talking about a system that hasn't even interacted with a ridge or a trough that it's going to develop with, and that ridge and trough doesn't even exist yet. So it's a model projection of something that is down the road, which is why you get these big swings in model forecasting, especially 8 to 10 days down the road. So if you are getting information from other sources, that's fine. I certainly encourage you to do so. Just keep in mind that there are limitations with the modeling and with that type of information that is going to be likely to change. So just keep that in mind. So as we move forward here, what are we actually looking at? Well, currently, really doesn't have a whole lot to do with what we're potentially going to see down the road. But I always like to start out with our current setups, and that's what we've got. We've got a lot of dry air down here. That's what that orange and red represents. We got a little upper level low here, and so I like to designate that with UL. Some people like to draw a little hook there. And then we've got the remnants of a cold front that is fading and dying, moving through the Carolinas, and eventually that will work down into our area this afternoon and evening. Might even be able to pulse up a couple of thunderstorms along with that, so we do have a very low-end severe risk with that. No tornado risk, but possibility of some hail, maybe even some damaging wind gusts. So let's move forward and talk about the things that you came here for me to talk about, which is the tropics. So what we'll start with here is the GFS, which has been super excitable as of late, and last week was posting a hurricane in the Gulf of Mexico for this week. That's certainly not going to happen, and there's a couple reasons why the GFS likes to do this. One of it is because it has a feedback loop on moisture, so we call that a convective feedback loop. And you'll notice that even in this model run, there is a convective feedback loop to it, which I think is still kind of a miss. But the GFS is starting to come more into reality. So when you're looking at these single model runs, that means you're looking at a map like this. Somebody is posting a map like this. What this is showing is just one member of that GFS suite that is showing the possible solution. So we call these deterministic runs. Now, when we're talking about that far in the future, usually what we want to be looking at is ensemble runs, because that gives us a spread of possible solutions. And the more the spread of the possible solutions is picking out the same solution, then the higher the confidence in that forecast becomes, because then all of these members of this model are all of a sudden picking out the same kind of thing, and you go, okay, so this really is picking up something. When you see a big spread or you see one deterministic run or one model running something over and over and over again and the other ones aren't, well, then that leaves you a big gap in confidence, and you're saying, okay, well, why is this one picking it out and the other ones aren't? So the GFS has been very excitable and has a history of being excitable. So that's good and bad, because it's good because it sniffs out a lot of things that other models miss. It's bad because it gives us a lot of false alarms. So all the model runs last week that were saying hurricane in the Gulf of Mexico, this week, those were all false alarm runs. They're not right. But it was starting to pick up on some kind of tropical activity, which is probably going to be right. Now, in what way or what shape or form, yet to be determined, because again, we've got a long time frame between now and when we could possibly see something develop, which will be probably early to middle of next week. So let's roll through this. So this is the GFS run, and you can kind of tell here what we're waiting on is the Central American gyre to develop. So that is that broad circulation to develop down here. That probably won't happen till about Friday or Saturday. So we'll see some kind of precipitation down here. Now, right along the Bay of Bengal and going down, not the Bay of Bengal, the Yucatan Peninsula, and on the east side of the Yucatan Peninsula toward the Caribbean and northern Caribbean, that's where we see stuff that is favored to develop in that region, just because of the shape of the coastline. It kind of helps actually curve things along, especially when you have CAG. So we will watch that area, and the GFS has a convective feedback loop here. So this is what I'm talking about. If you watch this shower and thunderstorm complex that is down in the eastern Pacific down here, you'll see that it crosses the land and gets pulled into a circulation that is trying to develop on the east side of the Yucatan Peninsula. Now, is that actually a reality, something that should happen over 3 days, where you're talking about diurnal heating and land interaction, where you're actually going to see convection jump from the eastern Pacific to the Caribbean? Probably not. So that is a feedback loop that we're looking at here that is probably incorrect. So it holds on to that, and it kind of spins it up into this like really tight micro circulation, which, if this did verify, might even be able to strengthen up to, you know, a really small hurricane before running into the Yucatan Peninsula. But what the GFS really lacks is that it underdoes high pressure ridges. And with that, what that usually means is that on the northern extent, it usually weakens troughs faster than it should. So when we get out to hour 150 and 180, we start seeing errors become multiplied, because you're now enhancing that error by time steps. So now things that are supposed to interact with other things to develop things are now interacting with something that is imaginary, because it's underdone in the model or overdone in the model. Now, all models have bias, but the GFS really likes to underdo high pressure ridges and overdo troughs. So typically the GFS is a little too excited about convection and a little too excited about the feedback of convection, because it's underdoing high pressure ridges. So that's important to know here. The other thing that's important to know is that we have a big tut low that's hanging out in the middle of the Atlantic. We have a ton of shear across the Caribbean, and then going back into the Gulf of Mexico, where a high pressure system is going to develop in the wake of a trough. So here's our trough coming on through. Here's our big ridge. Here's another ridge that develops behind that trough. So this trough is probably overdone just a little bit, and this ridge is probably underdone. So what does that mean? Well, that means that it creates a weakness in this area where that trough is overdone and the ridge is underdone. And with that weakness, we could potentially see something develop like this. So that's saying that if that does verify, then you get something that comes out like a tropical system down here. Now, if that ridge corrects and becomes closer to reality, and that trough is in fact weaker, which is what we have seen over the last successive runs, well, then we probably don't get the development like this here, and it's probably shifted a little further off to the east, which means over the Yucatan Peninsula, and we probably just have a broad area of circulation. Now, what does the GFS do? Well, it runs it up into the Gulf of Mexico, and then it starts getting sheared to absolute pieces, because A, we're going to have dry air over the Gulf of Mexico, and B, we're going to have a ton of shear, which is part of the reason why, when we were looking at the solutions last week, I was saying that that's not reality because there was dry air and shear in those runs too, but the GFS, for whatever reason, was ignoring them and developing a major hurricane. So I don't know about you, but I've never seen a major hurricane develop in dry air and high shear. Just never happened. Not the type of equation that makes sense. So to me, those solutions didn't make sense. To me, this solution does make a little more sense. Now, I think that there is some convective feedback issues going on to develop it there on the eastern side of the Yucatan, but is it plausible? Sure. And then once we get into the Gulf of Mexico, it's sheared, it's a big weak low, and you'll note that it never even impacts our area at all based on this GFS run. And most of the GFS runs that have been relatively excitable have been central and southern Florida. I also don't think that that is correct either, because again, high pressure ridge probably underdone, which means you slide this east and you slide that system, or you slide that system west, and you slide the high pressure ridge west and all the moisture along with it. So it's likely that we see something big and sheared that is suppressed to the southern Gulf of Mexico and probably never catches that trough and pulled off to the east. If it does, then it ends up in this blocking pattern and then eventually gets picked up by an upper level trough and swung up into Canada. So if this did verify, we would see nothing from this. Now there's other model runs that are a little further off to the west, which would potentially mean that we see some rain or maybe even a tropical storm at best. So what's a better way of actually viewing potential tropical outcomes? Well, it's with our ensembles, and I like to use the ensemble spaghettios. They call them that because they look like SpaghettiOs. So you'll see down here that we have all of the members projected on top of each other, and it's showing about a 15 to 20% chance of development by Saturday right there in the Western Caribbean on the east side of the Yucatan Peninsula. And then it throws those models that do get out there and fit right between. It makes them a couple of them. So there's one, two. There's two that throw it into a major hurricane and run it into the Florida Peninsula. And then there's one that gets caught up in the upper level low or upper level trough and pulls it really far north. So this would be an extra tropical system. So when you're talking about each member being a 2% chance, so right at the moment, the GFS, which is the only one, but the GFS has a 4% chance of a major hurricane in the Gulf of Mexico sometime next week, probably in the middle of the week. So that's a really low percentage chance. What it does show is quite a few ensemble members that show a big low that comes out with CAG and gets lifted off to the north. Most of them tropical in nature, but big shear lows. It's basically like an upper level low at that point in time, just big rainmakers and some wave makers. So there's a far greater chance that we're talking about some kind of area of low pressure that may be tropical in nature, but not necessarily very strong, that comes out into the Gulf of Mexico. That's this big low and it's sheared and the moisture's on the east side of that system that could potentially affect us as we go through the middle and end of next week. But right now, that's about as clear as the details get. So about as clear as mud at this point in time. So how about the European model? And we'll go over here and we'll show you what the Euro has as of late. So these are the ensemble tracks. And note that we're talking about next Monday here. And the Euro is far less excited about any kind of tropical activity coming out of it because the Euro has a stronger high pressure ridge. So the stronger ridge keeps everything suppressed to the south and suppressed west, which means more land interaction, less chance that we get something to develop here on the east side of the Yucatan Peninsula, and more likely that we're either pushing that energy into the eastern Pacific or we're pushing it into the Bay of Campeche down there on the western side of the Yucatan Peninsula, which is basically how this does resolve. The deterministic, meaning the one model run from the Euro, the main model run from the Euro, does develop a tropical system down here in the Bay of Campeche and then runs it back into Mexico. But you'll note that there's 1, 2, 3. So there's a 6% chance on the Euro that gets lifted north and some kind of weak tropical system ends up coming into the northern Gulf of Mexico. So 6% chance on that one that there's even a tropical system in the Gulf of Mexico next week, and that's next Wednesday on those hours there. So I go all the way out here and show you the totality. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So 8% chance based off of the Euro ensembles that we have something tropical out there. The GFS is a little more excited. It's closer to about 30% that we have something tropical out there. But even then, the spread is a little too dispersive, in my opinion, and we're still getting those feedback loops. So we've seen a correction over last week to this week. I think we continue to see that correction, but we are coming closer together as far as what the Euro ensembles are showing and what the GEFS ensembles are showing. So I think we are getting an idea that, yes, we are going to see the Central American gyre develop down here, and that we possibly could see something come out of it. But is it something that we need to be super concerned about at this moment? No. We're talking about a 6 to 8% chance that we're talking about anything tropical in the Gulf of Mexico at all at the current moment, and an even smaller percent chance that we're talking about hurricane or major hurricane in the Gulf of Mexico at this moment. And then add on top of that it is May, that we're going to have dry air and shear, and that leads me to believe that there's even less of a chance that we're talking about something major, meaning big hurricane or major hurricane happening in the Gulf of Mexico. So certainly, is it plausible? Sure. Is it possible? Sure. Is it likely right now? No. Something we need to watch? Absolutely. I'll continue to update this and give you guys more information, but I wanted to do a little more long form than what I could just put out on social media to type out, so I did this in a video. So hope you enjoyed, hope you stuck around for the entirety of the thing. And just to reiterate, I don't care where you get information from. I don't care if you're looking at other weather pages and those pages that like to post out that information. Just keep in mind that when you are that far in the future on your time steps, that there are going to be errors in the model, and that you are looking at something that's probably not likely to verify. Could it? Sure. But is it likely? Not really. So keep that in mind when you are looking at stuff that is that far out into the future. And come back here and I'll try to give you a little more reality take on it, on how I see it. I'm not a hype person. I don't root for storms. I certainly am not rooting for hurricanes. So I'm not going to be one of those that says, well, there's one member that shows this, because that's just not me. So, I'm going to give you what I believe to be correct. And, I might not always be correct, but I'm going to give my best shot at what I see and how I see things unfold. So that's where I stand for now. Hope you guys enjoyed, and make sure that you come back later.